Charles Cullen wasn't your typical serial killer lurking in dark alleys. This guy wore scrubs, carried a stethoscope, and spent 16 years systematically poisoning patients while everyone around him thought he was just doing his job. Born on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey, Cullen's life was basically a horror story from day one. His father died when he was just 7 months old, and his childhood was what he described as absolutely miserable. The bullying was so bad that at 9 years old, he tried to kill himself by drinking chemicals from a chemistry set. When Cullen was 17, his mother died in a car accident, and that completely devastated him. He was so upset that the hospital didn't tell him right away and cremated her body instead of returning it to the family. After graduating high school, he joined the Navy and served on a nuclear submarine called the USS Woodrow Wilson, where he operated Poseidon missiles. But even there, the bullying continued, and he made more suicide attempts. Before we dive into these twisted stories, tell us in the comments, do you think bullying in schools should be taken care strictly? Hit that subscribe button and let's get into this madness together. After getting discharged from the Navy, Cullen decided to become a nurse, graduating from nursing school in 1987. He got married and had 2 daughters, but his personal life was falling apart with a messy divorce in 1993, custody battles, bankruptcy, and heavy drinking. The court-ordered child support payments forced him to keep working as a nurse, even though he claimed he wanted to quit. Here's where things get absolutely terrifying. Cullen started his killing spree on June 11, 1988, at St. Barnabas Hospital by giving a patient a lethal overdose of intravenous medication. His methods were sickeningly clever. He'd inject patients with massive doses of digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine, drugs that would cause cardiac arrest or send them into deadly blood sugar crashes. The scariest part? He knew exactly how to make these deaths look natural because he understood how these medications worked. Cullen's pattern was absolutely chilling. He'd move from hospital to hospital whenever suspicion started rising, leaving a trail of bodies behind him. After St. Barnabas, he went to Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, where he murdered 3 elderly women with digoxin overdoses. One victim even told people that a sneaky male nurse had injected her while she slept, but nobody believed her. The guy was basically hacking the hospital system before anyone knew what hacking really meant. He'd access computerized drug dispensing cabinets and request medications that his patients weren't prescribed. The records showed him making multiple drug requests within minutes of each other, then canceling them immediately. He was literally using the hospital's own technology to cover his tracks while he murdered people. Between 1993 and 2003, Cullen worked at multiple facilities including Hunterdon Medical Center, Morristown Memorial Hospital, Liberty Nursing Center, Easton Hospital, and finally Somerset Medical Center. At each place, he left behind suspicious deaths that nobody connected until it was way too late. Hospital administrators were so focused on avoiding liability that they'd quietly fire him instead of reporting his behavior. At Somerset Medical Center, things finally started unraveling when they noticed he was accessing rooms and computer records of patients he wasn't assigned to. The hospital's drug dispensing system showed he was requesting medications his patients hadn't been prescribed. When a patient died of low blood sugar in October 2003, Somerset finally called the New Jersey State Police. The investigation revealed that Cullen had been doing this for 16 years across 9 different hospitals. He confessed to killing 30 to 40 patients, but investigators believed the real number could be closer to 400, making him potentially the most prolific serial killer in American history. The guy literally had a body count that made other serial killers look like amateurs. What made Cullen so dangerous wasn't just his methods, but his ability to blend in. His colleague Amy Luffren, who helped investigators catch him, described him as a friend. She had no idea the quiet guy she worked with was systematically murdering patients until investigators showed her the evidence from the drug dispensing systems. Cullen claimed he was ending patient suffering, but that was complete nonsense. Many of his victims weren't terminal at all. They were people expected to recover, people on the mend who had their lives stolen by someone they trusted. In 2004, he was convicted of 29 murders and received 11 consecutive life sentences. He's currently serving time at New Jersey State Prison, where he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Beverly Allitt was born on October 4, 1968, in Grantham, Lincolnshire, and from the very beginning, her behavior was absolutely disturbing. Growing up in the village of Corby Glen with two sisters and a brother, Allitt showed classic signs of Munchausen syndrome during her teenage years. She'd constantly fake illnesses and injuries to get attention, showing up to school with mysterious bandages and claiming various ailments that never seemed to be real. Her father Richard worked in an off-license shop while her mother was a school cleaner, and they had no idea their daughter was developing into a monster. Allitt failed the test to get into Kesteven and Grantham Girls' School, so she ended up at Charles Reed Secondary Modern School instead. She loved volunteering for babysitting jobs, which should have been a massive red flag considering what she'd eventually do to children. At 16, she left school and enrolled in a nursing course at Grantham College, probably thinking the medical field would give her all the attention and drama she craved. What made Allitt particularly dangerous was that she suffered from both Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is extremely rare. With regular Munchausen syndrome, people fake or cause their own illnesses for attention, but with the proxy version, they hurt other people to get sympathy and recognition. When faking her own problems stopped getting her the reaction she wanted, Allitt escalated to harming innocent children. In February 1991, Allitt started working as a state-enrolled nurse on Ward 4 at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital, and that's when her killing spree began. Her first victim was 7-month-old Liam Taylor, who was admitted on February 21st with a simple chest infection. Allitt went out of her way to reassure Liam's parents that he was in capable hands and convince them to go home and rest. When they returned, she told them Liam had suffered a respiratory emergency but claimed he'd recovered. Allitt volunteered for extra night duty so she could watch over the boy, which his grateful parents thought was incredibly caring. But when she was left alone with Liam just before midnight, his condition suddenly worsened dramatically. He became deathly pale, then red blotches appeared on his face before she called for an emergency resuscitation team. The nursing staff were confused because the alarm monitors that should have sounded when he stopped breathing had mysteriously failed to work. Liam suffered cardiac arrest and severe brain damage, and his heartbroken parents eventually made the devastating decision to remove him from life support. Over the next 59 days, Allitt attacked 13 children in total, killing 4 of them and leaving the survivors with permanent disabilities and chronic pain. Her methods were absolutely diabolical. She'd inject massive doses of insulin to cause dangerous blood sugar crashes, administer other unknown toxic substances, and even inject air bubbles into their bloodstreams. One victim was found with a large air bubble in their body, which could have caused a fatal embolism. What made Allitt's crimes even more twisted was how she'd manipulate the families of her victims. She'd present herself as heartbroken about what happened to their children or even position herself as the hero who tried to save them. Parents who trusted her completely had no idea she was the one systematically poisoning and torturing their babies. She'd offer comfort and support while secretly planning her next attack. The hospital staff started getting suspicious when they noticed an unusual number of cardiac arrests happening specifically on Ward 4. The final victim that made them call police was Claire Peck, whose death was so suspicious that medical professionals couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. When investigators looked at the duty rosters, they discovered that Allitt was the only nurse present during every single incident. Police arrested Alit on July 26, 1991, but she wasn't formally charged until November. During interrogation, she showed absolutely no emotion and calmly denied everything, insisting she'd just been caring for the victims. When they searched her home, police found parts of the missing nursing log, plus extensive background checks revealed her pattern of disturbing behavior going back to childhood. While awaiting trial, Alit developed anorexia nervosa and lost 5 stone in weight, which experts said was another symptom of her psychological problems. She refused to confess despite multiple assessments by healthcare professionals. At her trial in February 1993 at Nottingham Crown Court, prosecutors showed how she was present at each suspicious episode and how there were no incidents when she was off the ward. They presented evidence of high insulin and potassium readings in victims, drug injection marks, and proof that she'd cut off oxygen by smothering or tampering with machines. Professor Roy Meadow explained to the jury how Alit demonstrated symptoms of both types of Munchausen syndrome. On May 28, 1993, she was convicted of 4 murders, 5 attempted murders, and 6 counts of causing grievous bodily harm, receiving 13 life sentences. Justice David Latham told her she was a serious danger to others and would likely never be considered safe for release. She's currently detained at Rampton Secure Hospital and became eligible for parole in November 2021 after serving 30 years, though she's never admitted her guilt or explained her motives. Lucy Letby was born on January 4, 1990, in Hereford, and grew up in the small town of Hereford with her parents John and Susan, who were both accountants. From the outside, she appeared to be the perfect daughter who dreamed of becoming a nurse from childhood and worked incredibly hard to achieve that goal. She studied at the University of Chester from 2009 to 2011, earning her nursing degree with a focus on caring for sick babies. But nobody could have predicted that this seemingly sweet and dedicated young woman would become Britain's most prolific child serial killer of modern times. In 2011, right after graduating, Letby started working at the Countess of Chester Hospital's neonatal unit, where she specialized in caring for the most vulnerable premature and sick newborns. By 2013, she'd qualified as a Band 5 nurse, which meant she had advanced skills and training to handle the sickest babies in the intensive care section of the ward. Her colleagues described her as hard-working and competent, and parents trusted her completely with their precious babies. But starting in June 2015, Letby began a year-long killing spree that would terrorize the neonatal unit. Her first victim was baby a premature twin boy who'd been doing well after his birth. On June 8, 2015, while Letby was caring for him during a night shift, she injected air into his bloodstream through his nasogastric tube. The baby suddenly collapsed and died despite desperate attempts to save him. What made it even more twisted was that Letby volunteered to take his body to the mortuary and later told colleagues it was the hardest thing she'd ever had to do, playing the role of the devastated nurse. Letby's methods were absolutely diabolical and showed she understood exactly how to cause maximum harm while making deaths appear natural. She'd inject air into babies' bloodstreams, causing fatal air embolisms that would trigger sudden collapses. She also forced air into their gastrointestinal tracts, injected massive doses of insulin to cause deadly blood sugar crashes, and force-fed overdoses of milk or fluids that would cause them to choke. Some victims suffered what appeared to be impact-type trauma, suggesting she'd physically abused them. What made Letby particularly evil was how she'd torment the families of her victims. When baby E was bleeding from his mouth after she'd attacked him, his mother heard him screaming and found Letby in the room. Letby calmly told the terrified mother that the blood was from a nasogastric tube and said, "Trust me, I'm a nurse." The baby died just hours later, but Letby sent a sympathy card to his grieving parents on the day of his funeral. Police later discovered she'd photographed the card before sending it and kept the pictures on her phone like some sick trophy. Letby became obsessed with the families of babies she'd harmed or killed, stalking them on social media and inserting herself into their grief. She'd show up uninvited to comfort sessions where parents were processing their trauma, forcing staff to tell her multiple times to leave them alone. She even kept hospital documents related to her victims hidden under her bed at home, including 21 sheets specifically about babies she'd attacked. The most chilling evidence against Letby came from handwritten notes found during police searches of her home. On a green post-it note inside her 2016 diary, she'd written, "I am evil, I did this, and I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough." Other notes contain fragments like, "I'm sorry that you couldn't have a chance at life, I don't want to do this anymore, and I don't know if I killed them, maybe I did, maybe this is all down to me." Her diary was also marked with the initials of dead babies on the dates they were born, attacked, and died. Hospital staff finally started getting suspicious when they noticed an alarming increase in deaths and sudden collapses, specifically during Letby's shifts. Senior doctors realized that every single suspicious incident had occurred when she was on duty, and they moved her to clerical work in July 2016. The investigation, called Operation Hummingbird, involved nearly 70 officers and took years to build the complex case against her. On July 9, 2018, police arrested Letby at her home in Chester, where she was living with her parents. Body camera footage showed her calmly letting officers in while wearing a blue hoodie and tracksuit bottoms, acting completely relaxed even as they put her in handcuffs. During her police interview that same day, she remained eerily calm and showed no emotion when discussing the deaths of babies under her care. At her trial in Manchester Crown Court, which lasted over 9 months, prosecutors described Letby's cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of murder. On August 18, 2023, the jury convicted her of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others, making her one of the most prolific female serial killers in British history. Judge James Goss sentenced her to life in prison without parole, saying there was deep malevolence bordering on sadism in her actions and that she showed no remorse. She refused to attend her sentencing hearing, denying her victims' families the chance to see justice served. Lucy Letby is currently serving 15 life sentences and will never be released from prison. Sometimes the most dangerous predators hunt in packs, and when healthcare workers band together with murderous intent, the results are absolutely catastrophic. The 1980s saw one of history's most chilling examples of group serial killing when 4 women transformed an Austrian hospital ward into their personal hunting ground. The Lane's Angels of Death weren't your typical serial killers operating alone in the shadows. They were a twisted sisterhood that turned Vienna's Geriatriazentrum am Wienerwald into their personal killing ground from 1983 to 1989. This deadly quartet consisted of Waltraud Wagner, the ringleader who discovered her taste for murder at age 23, Maria Gruber, a 19-year-old nursing school dropout and single mother, and Irina Lydolf, a 21-year-old married woman who preferred spending time with her murderous girlfriends over going home. Together, these 3 women, along with their 4th accomplice Stefanija Meyer, transformed Pavilion 5 into what became known as the Death Pavilion. Waltraud Wagner was the undisputed leader and mastermind behind this horrifying operation. It all started when a 77-year-old patient begged Wagner to end her suffering, and instead of feeling guilt after giving the woman a lethal morphine overdose, Wagner experienced pure exhilaration. She discovered she absolutely loved playing God and holding the power of life and death in her hands, and this twisted revelation became an addiction she couldn't shake. Wagner wasn't content to keep this sick thrill to herself. She actively recruited accomplices from the night shift, using her charismatic personality to draw vulnerable young women into her deadly game. Maria Gruber was Wagner's first recruit, and her youth made her particularly malleable to Wagner's influence. As a single mother struggling with the demanding work schedule and financial pressures, Gruber was looking for acceptance and a sense of belonging when Wagner offered her a twisted form of friendship. Wagner convinced Gruber that eliminating difficult patients was actually a mercy, and since fewer patients would also make their workload easier, this reasoning appealed to someone already overwhelmed by her circumstances. Gruber quickly embraced Wagner's philosophy and became an enthusiastic participant in the murders. Irina Lydolf was the third member of this deadly trio, and despite being married, she clearly preferred the company of her murderous co-workers to her life at home. Some sources suggest she was avoiding an abusive marriage and found refuge in the camaraderie of the night shift. Like Gruber, Lydolf was drawn into Wagner's web through a combination of peer pressure and the promise of power over their otherwise chaotic lives. All three women felt trapped and powerless in their brutal jobs and difficult personal situations, so Wagner's offer to exercise control through murder became irresistible. Initially, the trio stuck to morphine and sedative overdoses, but Wagner quickly grew bored with these simple methods. Like some twisted adrenaline junkie needing a bigger fix, she invented what they called the water cure, which was absolutely horrifying. This method required all three accomplices working together. One would hold the victim's head and pinch their nose, another would hold down the patient's tongue, and the third would pour water down their throat until they drowned in their own bed. The process was agonizing and could take 45 to 60 minutes of pure torture. The genius of this method, from their twisted perspective, was that it looked completely natural since elderly patients frequently had fluid in their lungs anyway. What made these three women truly evil was how they chose their victims. These weren't mercy killings of terminally ill patients begging for death. They were cold-blooded murders motivated by petty annoyances and personal convenience. If a patient snored too loudly, soiled their sheets, refused medication, or buzzed for help at inconvenient times, Wagner would declare, "This one gets a ticket to God," and the trio would plan their murder for the next night. They were literally sentencing people to death for being sick and needing care. The three women turned murder into entertainment, spending their off hours at local taverns bragging about their favorite kills. They'd laugh about the expressions on victims' faces as they died and share stories about which patients struggled the most during their torture sessions. One of their most celebrated murders was Julia Drapel, an elderly woman who'd made the mistake of refusing medication and insulting Wagner. The group decided this verbal slight deserved the ultimate punishment, so they subjected Drapel to their water cure method while reminiscing about it later over drinks. By 1987, their killing frequency had dramatically increased, and rumors of a killer in Pavilion 5 began spreading through the hospital. The deadly partnership between Wagner, Gruber, and Lydolf created one of the most systematic killing operations in European history. Wagner was described by prosecutors as a sadistic Svengali who awakened the murderous instincts in her followers, teaching them proper lethal injection techniques and perfecting her water torture method. She maintained strict control over the group's activities, deciding which patients deserved to die and orchestrating the murders like a twisted conductor leading her deadly orchestra. Her accomplices looked up to her as their leader and rarely questioned her decisions about who should live or die. Gruber's role in the group was particularly disturbing because of her young age when the killing spree began. At just 19 years old, she was essentially a teenager when she started participating in the systematic torture and murder of elderly patients. Her willingness to hold down struggling victims during the water cure sessions showed a level of cruelty that belied her youth. Prosecutors later determined that Gruber had personally assisted in multiple murders over the 6-year period, making her complicit in some of Austria's worst healthcare serial killings. Lydolf proved to be just as sadistic as her companions, actively participating in both injection murders and the horrifying water cure drownings. She would rotate between the different roles during the torture sessions, sometimes being the one to hold the terrified patient's head while they slowly suffocated and drowned. What made Lydolf's participation even more chilling was how she'd keep careful track of Wagner's activities, later telling investigators that she believed Wagner had murdered around 100 people in just the last 2 years alone. Their reign of terror finally ended in February 1989 when the three women got careless during one of their drinking sessions. They were at a local tavern loudly bragging about Julia Drapel's death, laughing about how the woman had struggled and describing what her face looked like as she drowned. What they didn't realize was that a hospital doctor was sitting at a nearby table, and he was so horrified by what he overheard that he immediately reported them to authorities. This single moment of arrogance and the need to brag about their crimes brought down their entire operation. When police arrested all four women on April 7, 1989, each of the three tried different defense strategies. Gruber and Lydolf initially attempted to portray themselves as helpless followers who were forced into the murders by Wagner's dominant personality. They claimed they were just following orders and that Wagner was the real mastermind behind everything. Wagner, meanwhile, tried to minimize her involvement by claiming she'd only killed about 10 patients to alleviate their suffering. However, the evidence painted a much darker picture of systematic murder spanning 6 years. The investigation revealed the true scope of their crimes when authorities ordered exhumations of suspected victims. Forensic tests detected traces of rohypnol and dominol in several bodies, proving these weren't natural deaths or mercy killings but calculated murders. The group initially confessed to 49 murders, but investigators believed the real number could be as high as 300 or 400 victims. Many bodies had been cremated, making an exact count impossible. At their trial in 1991, the three women received varying sentences based on their level of involvement. Wagner was convicted of 15 murders, 17 attempted murders, and 2 counts of assault, receiving a life sentence. Lydolf was found guilty of 5 murders and also received life in prison. Gruber received the lightest sentence of 15 years, later reduced to 12, for manslaughter and attempted murder charges. The judge called their crimes the most brutal and gruesome in Austria's history. In what many considered a grave miscarriage of justice, all three women were eventually released from prison. Gruber was freed in the early 2000s, while Wagner and Lydolf were released in 2008 for good behavior. They were all given new identities and disappeared back into Austrian society, causing massive public outrage. Their early releases sparked debates about whether the justice system had adequately punished these three women who had systematically tortured and murdered dozens of innocent patients who trusted them with their lives. Hold up. Which one of these three women do you think was the most evil? Drop a comment and let us know if it's Wagner the manipulative ringleader, Gruber the teenage killer, or Lydolf the calculating accomplice. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more disturbing cases like this. Kristen Gilbert was born Kristen Heather Strickland on November 13, 1967, in Fall River, Massachusetts, which ironically was also the hometown of the infamous Lizzie Borden. She grew up in what seemed like a completely normal middle-class family, with her dad Richard working as an electronics executive and her mom Claudia being a homemaker and part-time teacher. But even as a teenager, friends and family started noticing that Kristen had a serious problem with lying and manipulation. She'd constantly make up stories and fake things to get attention, which was basically foreshadowing the monster she'd become. When Kristen started college at Bridgewater State College in 1986, her twisted personality really started showing. She began having what officials called psychiatric episodes where she'd make violent threats against herself and others. After faking a suicide attempt to manipulate people around her, the college ordered her into psychiatric treatment. This forced her to transfer first to Mount Wachusett Community College and then to Greenfield Community College, where she finally graduated with a nursing diploma in 1988. She became a registered nurse that same year and married Glenn Gilbert, but her marriage was doomed from the start. In 1989, Kristen got hired at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts, where she'd spend the next 7 years terrorizing elderly war veterans. Her colleagues quickly noticed something absolutely disturbing about her shifts. Patients died at an alarming rate whenever she was working. Instead of investigating properly, they actually started calling her the Angel of Death as a sick joke, which in hindsight seems incredibly inappropriate. During her time there, 350 deaths occurred on her shifts, and prosecutors later calculated that the probability of this being a coincidence was 1 in 100 million. What made Gilbert particularly evil was how she turned murder into a twisted game to impress her boyfriend. She started having an affair with James Perot, a Gulf War veteran who worked as a security guard at the hospital. Her marriage to Glenn completely fell apart, and he later claimed that Kristen had tried to poison him multiple times. She became obsessed with getting Perot's attention and decided that creating medical emergencies would be the perfect way to show off her nursing skills and spend more time with him. Gilbert's method was absolutely diabolical and showed she understood exactly how to commit what she thought were perfect murders. She'd steal epinephrine from the hospital's drug supply and inject lethal doses directly into patients' intravenous therapy bags. Epinephrine is synthetic adrenaline that's normally used to save lives during heart attacks, but in overdose amounts, it causes the heart to race uncontrollably until it fails completely. The victims would experience what appeared to be natural cardiac arrest, making their deaths look completely normal. The truly sick part of Gilbert's plan was that she'd inject patients with the epinephrine, then rush in to try to save them when their hearts started failing. This allowed her to play the hero while secretly being the one causing the emergencies in the first place. Perot would be called to the intensive care unit during these codes, giving Gilbert the perfect opportunity to impress him with her apparent life-saving skills. She was literally murdering innocent veterans just to get her boyfriend's attention and admiration. Her confirmed victims included Stanley Jagodowski, Henry Huden, Kenneth Cutting, and Edward Squire, but investigators believe she killed many more. Hospital staff finally started getting suspicious in February 1996 when they noticed the correlation between Gilbert's shifts and both the increase in deaths and the mysterious decrease in the hospital's epinephrine supply. 3 of her co-workers filed formal complaints about the recent deaths of 2 patients and the missing drugs. When Gilbert realized people were catching on, she quit her job at the hospital, but this decision completely destroyed her relationship with Perot. She started dropping in and out of psychiatric wards and eventually had a complete breakdown. During one of these episodes, she called Perot and made a shocking confession, telling him, "You know I did it, you wanted to know, I killed those guys." She later made similar confessions to her ex-husband Glenn. Instead of keeping quiet about Gilbert's confession, Perot did the right thing and reported it to authorities, which launched a full investigation. In a desperate attempt to derail the investigation, Gilbert made a hoax bomb threat against the hospital, but this only made things worse for her. Federal investigators exhumed several bodies of patients who died during her shifts and found epinephrine in their tissues, even though none of them had been prescribed the drug. There was absolutely no medical reason for synthetic adrenaline to be in their bodies. Gilbert's trial took place from November 2000 to March 2001 at the federal courthouse, and prosecutors argued that she murdered patients purely for the thrill and to impress Perot. The jury convicted her of 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 2 counts of attempted murder. Although prosecutors initially sought the death penalty because the crimes occurred on federal property, the judge ultimately sentenced Gilbert to life in prison without parole. She's currently serving her sentence and will never be released, ending the career of one of America's most manipulative and attention-seeking healthcare serial killers. Jane Toppin, nicknamed Jolly Jane, was absolutely twisted in ways that'll make your skin crawl. Born Honora Kelly on March 31, 1854, in Boston, Massachusetts, this woman's childhood was a complete disaster that basically turned her into a monster. Her mother died of tuberculosis when Jane was tiny, and her father Peter Kelly was known as Kelly the Crack because he was a complete lunatic who actually sewed his own eyelids closed while working as a tailor. Talk about red flags everywhere. In 1860, when Jane was just 6 years old, her alcoholic father dumped her and her sister at the Boston Female Asylum because he couldn't deal with them anymore. The records literally said they were rescued from a very miserable home, which gives you an idea of how bad things were. Her sister Delia ended up becoming a prostitute while their other sister Nellie got committed to an insane asylum. The whole family was cursed from the start. 2 years later, in 1862, Jane got placed as an indentured servant with Mrs. and Toppin in Lowell, Massachusetts. She took their last name to distance herself from her horrible past, but honestly, changing your name doesn't fix the damage that's already been done. When she turned 18, they gave her $50 and set her free, but Jane chose to stay and work for them as a regular servant. After Toppin died and the daughter got married and moved away, Jane decided to become a nurse and started training at Cambridge Hospital in Boston. This is where things got absolutely terrifying because she discovered she had this sick fascination with watching people suffer and die. She'd falsify medical records to keep patients in the hospital longer just so she could get to know them better before killing them. She thought elderly patients were useless and not worth keeping alive, so she dosed them with opium to see how they'd react. Jane's methods were absolutely diabolical. She used morphine and atropine to bring patients right to the edge of death, then sometimes bring them back, only to kill them again. She'd climb into bed with her victims as they were dying and hold them close while experiencing what she called voluptuous delight and the greatest conceivable pleasure. This sick woman was getting sexual thrills from watching people take their last breaths, and she admitted this openly during her confession. During her nursing training, she killed at least a dozen people, but colleagues started getting suspicious when she kept giving patients drugs without doctor's orders and leaving her shift early. She got fired from Massachusetts General Hospital in 1890, but that didn't stop her. She just moved into private duty nursing where she had even less supervision and could kill with complete freedom. Jane's victim list reads like a horror movie. She poisoned her former landlords Israel and Lovey Dunham in the mid-1890s when they got suspicious of her. In 1899, she murdered her foster sister Elizabeth Toppin Brigham during what was supposed to be a friendly visit to the coast. But her most shocking crime spree happened when she completely wiped out the Davis family in Catomet on Cape Cod. She started with the elderly patriarch Alden Davis, then moved on to his wife and daughter, systematically poisoning each family member one by one. The way she did it was incredibly cruel. She'd bring them in and out of consciousness, playing with them like a cat plays with a mouse before the final kill. She even poisoned a housekeeper just enough to make her appear drunk so she could steal the woman's job and get closer to the family. When investigators finally caught up with her in 1901, Jane confessed to 31 murders but claimed she might have killed closer to 100 people. She told Dr. Stedman that her life goal was to have killed more helpless people than any other man or woman who ever lived. She showed absolutely zero remorse, saying she'd thought it all over and couldn't detect the slightest bit of sorrow over what she'd done. During her trial in 1902, Jane was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The doctors said she had an absence of moral responsibility, lack of memory, and tendency toward untruthfulness. As she sat in the courtroom waiting for the jury's decision, witnesses said she chatted, laughed, and was exceedingly jolly, living up to her nickname right until the end. She left the building smiling and spent the rest of her life in a mental asylum until she died in 1938. Jane Toppin proved that sometimes the people who seem the most caring and trustworthy are actually the most dangerous monsters hiding in plain sight. Niels Hogel was born in 1976 and grew up in what he described as a protected childhood in northern Germany, where both his grandmother and father worked as nurses. This family history in healthcare might have influenced his decision to become a nurse, but it definitely didn't prepare anyone for the monster he'd become. After completing his nursing training, Hogel started working at Klinikum Oldenburg between 1999 and 2002, then moved to Klinikum Delmenhorst from 2003 to 2005. What nobody realized was that patients started dying at an absolutely alarming rate whenever he was on duty. Hogel's twisted motivation was unlike any other serial killer because he wasn't trying to end suffering or get revenge. He was doing it purely for the adrenaline rush. He'd deliberately inject patients with massive overdoses of heart medication and other drugs to send them into cardiac arrest, then rush in to try to resuscitate them. The sick thrill he got came from playing God and seeing if he could bring people back from the brink of death. When investigators asked him why he did it, he admitted that he felt euphoric when he managed to bring a patient back to life, but devastated when he failed. His method was absolutely diabolical because he used his medical knowledge to commit what he thought were perfect crimes. Hogel would inject patients with drugs like Ajmalin, Gileuritmal, and other cardiac medications that would cause their hearts to stop beating. Since these were legitimate medical drugs that could be found in any hospital, the deaths initially looked completely natural. Nobody suspected that someone was deliberately causing these cardiac emergencies, especially since Hogel was always right there trying to save his victims. What made Hogel particularly evil was that he didn't discriminate based on the patient's conditions. He'd attack anyone just to satisfy his sick need for excitement. His victims ranged in age from 34 to 96 years old, and many of them were actually recovering well before he decided to use them for his twisted game. He later told investigators that he was bored during quiet shifts and would create medical emergencies just to have something exciting happen. The guy was literally murdering innocent people because he was bored at work. Hospital staff at both facilities started noticing disturbing patterns during Hogel's employment, but they failed to connect the dots or report their concerns to authorities. The death rates at both hospitals increased dramatically when he was working, but administrators didn't take proper action to investigate. This negligence allowed Hogel to continue his killing spree for years longer than it should have been possible. His reign of terror finally ended in 2005 when a colleague at Delmenhorst caught him in the act of injecting an unprescribed drug into a patient. The staff member immediately intervened and reported the incident, which led to Hogel's arrest and the beginning of a massive investigation. When police started looking into his background, they discovered an absolutely horrifying pattern of deaths that coincided perfectly with his work schedule. The investigation became one of the largest criminal cases in German history, involving the exhumation of 130 bodies to determine the cause of death. Investigators found traces of the cardiac medications Hogel had used in many of the exhumed bodies, proving that these patients had been murdered. However, some potential victims had been cremated, making it impossible to determine the true scope of his crimes. In 2015, Hogel was initially convicted of 2 murders and 2 attempted murders, receiving a life sentence. But as the investigation continued and more evidence emerged, prosecutors charged him with an additional 97 murders. During his second trial, which lasted 7 months, Hogel admitted to 43 of the killings, disputed 5, and claimed he couldn't remember the other 52. On June 6, 2019, the court in Oldenburg found Hogel guilty of 85 murders, making him modern Germany's most prolific serial killer. Judge Sebastian Behrmann sentenced him to life in prison and noted the particular seriousness of his crimes, which ensures he'll never be eligible for parole. During the sentencing, the judge told Hogel that his guilt was incomprehensible and said he felt like an accountant of death while reviewing all the evidence. In his final statement to the court, Hogel expressed shame and remorse, saying he realized how much pain and suffering he'd caused with his terrible deeds. He apologized to each family member present, but his words rang hollow considering the massive scale of his crimes. Investigators believe Ho-Gel may have killed up to 200 patients during his nursing career, but they'll never know the exact number because of destroyed evidence and cremated bodies. He's currently serving multiple life sentences and will spend the rest of his days in prison, where he belongs. Orville Lynn Majors was born on April 24, 1961, in Linton, Indiana, to a coal miner father and grew up in what appeared to be a lower-middle-class family. As a teenager, he took care of his elderly grandmother, and that experience supposedly inspired him to pursue nursing as a career. He graduated from Nashville Memorial School of Practical Nursing in 1989 and initially seemed like someone who genuinely wanted to help elderly patients. But nobody could have predicted that this seemingly caring young man would become one of America's most prolific healthcare serial killers. After graduation, Majors got his first job at Vermilion County Hospital in Clinton, which was located about 90 miles west of Indianapolis. He briefly left for a higher-paying position in Tennessee, but returned to VCH in 1993, which is when his killing spree began. What made Majors particularly dangerous was his method of choosing victims. He targeted patients he considered demanding, whiny, or too much work for him to handle. Basically, if you annoyed him or made his job more difficult, you could end up dead. The death rate at Vermilion County Hospital started climbing dramatically just 5 months after Majors returned to work there. Nurse Marilyn Alexander noticed the alarming increase in deaths in the intensive care unit and started keeping track of them on her personal calendar. By October 1994, another nurse named Debbie Sollers became so concerned about the mortality rate that she reported her worries to the nursing supervisor. A third nurse, Bill Balla, examined the hospital records and discovered a chilling pattern. The deaths were consistently happening during Majors' shifts. What's absolutely sickening is how the other nurses responded to this pattern. Instead of taking the suspicious deaths seriously, some of them started making jokes about the rising body count and even began placing bets on which patients would die next when Majors was working. They literally turned murder into a gambling game while innocent people were being killed. When Majors switched from regular shifts to weekend shifts, the deaths followed him there too. Majors' killing method was both simple and absolutely brutal. He'd inject patients with lethal doses of potassium chloride, which would stop their hearts instantly, or epinephrine, which would cause fatal cardiac arrest. Sometimes he'd use both drugs together to make sure his victims died. What made this particularly evil was that these were medications commonly found in hospitals, so the deaths initially appeared to be natural cardiac events. Police later found containers of both potassium chloride and epinephrine at his house and in his van, proving he was stealing hospital drugs to commit murder. The investigation into Majors began in March 1995 when hospital officials could no longer ignore the statistical impossibility of so many deaths occurring on one nurse's shifts. Investigators discovered that Majors was present at the sudden and unexpected deaths of 7 patients and that no one else was present at all 7 incidents. The victims included Mary Ann Alderson, Dorothea Dixon, Luella Hopkins, Freddie Dale Wilson, Derek Maxwell, and Cecil Smith, all of whom died during a 13-month period between 1993 and 1995. What made the case against Majors so strong was the testimony from family members who saw him near their loved ones just before they died. Several witnesses testified that they'd seen him giving injections to 4 of the victims immediately before their deaths. Medical experts determined that the deaths were consistent with potassium chloride and epinephrine injections, not the natural progression of the illnesses that had brought these patients to the hospital. During his trial, which began in August 1999, Majors maintained his innocence and claimed he was being used as a scapegoat for the hospital's poor medical practices. His defense team argued that the patients died from the ailments that brought them to the hospital in the first place. However, prosecutors built an overwhelming case around the fact that Majors was present and often alone when each patient died. The jury heard testimony from 79 witnesses over 5 weeks, including 23 doctors who provided technical medical evidence. On October 17, 1999, after deliberating for 33 hours over 4 days, the jury found Majors guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder. They couldn't reach a verdict on the 7th count, but 6 convictions were more than enough to put him away forever. When the verdict was read, Majors showed no emotion while his family members broke down in tears, with his sister Debbie McClelland crying out, "How could they do this to him? He didn't kill anyone." On November 15, 1999, Judge Ernest Yelton sentenced Majors to the maximum penalty of 360 years in prison, 60 years for each murder. During sentencing, the judge condemned Majors for the diabolical nature of his crimes, emphasizing that he committed murder in a place where people came to be healed. Judge Yelton told the court, "It is the judgment of this court that the maximum penalty is the minimally reasonable sentence in this case," while staring directly at Majors. He concluded by saying, "At long last, may the souls of Mary and Alderson, Dorothea Dixon, Luella Hopkins, Freddie Dale Wilson, Derek Maxwell, and Cecil Smith rest in peace." Majors died in prison on September 24, 2017, at age 56, still maintaining his innocence until the end. Though he was only convicted of 6 murders, investigators believe he may have killed as many as 130 patients, making him potentially one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Richard Angelo was born on August 29, 1962, to parents who were both working in education on Long Island, New York. His mother was an economics teacher and his father was a high school guidance counselor for the Lindenhurst School District, so Angelo grew up in what seemed like a stable, middle-class family. He graduated from St. John the Baptist Diocesan High School in 1980 and then entered a 2-year nursing program at Farmingdale State College, where he was actually a well-regarded honor student. But this academic success was hiding some serious psychological problems that would turn deadly once he started working as a nurse. In 1984, Angelo got hired at Good Samaritan Medical Center in West Islip as a registered nurse, eventually becoming the night supervisor in the intensive care unit. From the outside, his colleagues saw him as a dedicated and competent nurse who seemed to care deeply about his patients. But underneath this professional facade, Angelo was harboring a twisted desire for recognition and heroism that would drive him to commit some absolutely horrifying crimes. His psychological problems stemmed from crippling insecurity and feelings of inadequacy that he tried to solve in the most warped way possible. Angelo's sick plan was to inject patients with lethal doses of paralytic drugs, wait for them to go into cardiac arrest, then rush in to try to save them so he'd look like a hero in front of his colleagues. He used 2 powerful muscle relaxants called Pavulon and Anectine, which are normally used during surgery to paralyze patients while they're under anesthesia. These drugs cause complete paralysis, including the muscles needed for breathing, so victims would literally suffocate to death while remaining fully conscious and aware of what was happening to them. The truly evil part of Angelo's method was how he'd tell patients that he was giving them something to make them feel better right before injecting them with the deadly cocktail. Imagine being a sick, vulnerable person in a hospital bed, trusting your nurse to help you, only to have them deliberately paralyze you and watch you struggle to breathe. Soon after Angelo administered the injection, patients would begin to feel numb and their breathing would become constricted, along with their ability to communicate to other nurses and doctors. Most of them couldn't survive this deadly attack. During Angelo's 7-month employment at Good Samaritan, there were 37 code blue emergencies during his shifts, which was an absolutely astronomical number. Out of those 37 patients who went into cardiac arrest while he was working, only 12 survived. This should have been a massive red flag to hospital administrators, but somehow Angelo managed to keep working there for months while patients kept dying at an alarming rate. Angelo's twisted game finally came to an end on October 11, 1987, when he tried to kill 77-year-old Gerolamo Cusick. Cusick was visiting his children on Long Island when he became ill and was admitted to the hospital. Around 2 in the morning, Angelo showed up at his bedside wearing a white lab coat and asked how he was feeling before injecting him with Pavulon. But unlike Angelo's other victims, Cusick somehow survived the injection and was able to describe his attacker to hospital staff. Cusick told investigators that a man in a white coat had given him an injection that made him feel like he was choking and gasping for breath. He was able to identify Angelo from a lineup, which gave police the evidence they needed to make an arrest. When authorities searched Angelo's apartment, they found vials of both Pavulon and Anectine, plus a syringe that was laced with Pavulon. This physical evidence, combined with Cusick's testimony, was enough to charge Angelo with multiple murders. After his arrest in November 1987, Angelo actually confessed to poisoning patients with the paralytic drugs. He told investigators exactly what his sick motivation was, saying he wanted to create a situation where he would cause patients to have respiratory distress so he could come in and save them, making himself look like he knew what he was doing. He admitted he had no confidence in himself and felt very inadequate, so he was literally murdering people to boost his ego. Based on Angelo's confessions, Suffolk County officials exhumed 33 bodies of patients who had died suspiciously during his tenure at Good Samaritan. The medical examiner found traces of Pavulon in 6 of the exhumed bodies and determined that Pavulon directly caused the death of 4 victims. Angelo was ultimately charged with 4 counts of second-degree murder and multiple counts of assault for the patients he'd attacked. At his trial in 1989, prosecutors called Angelo a monster in nurses' whites who had usurped God's function. The prosecution argued that Angelo didn't give a damn about the patients he injected and showed depraved indifference to human life. His defense team tried to argue that he didn't intend to kill anyone and was suffering from psychological problems, but the jury wasn't buying it. On December 14, 1989, after a week of deliberations, the jury found Angelo guilty of second-degree murder in 2 deaths, manslaughter in 1 death, and criminally negligent homicide in the 4th. He was also convicted on multiple assault charges for the patients who survived his attacks. On January 17, 1990, Judge Alfred Tisch sentenced Angelo to 50 years to life in prison, telling him, "You had no right to usurp God's function." Each of those patients had a right to enjoy, in their own way, every day that was available to them. Angelo is currently serving his sentence at Clinton Correctional Facility in New York and will likely never be released. So here's the big question. Do you think justice was served with their early releases, or should these 3 have stayed locked up forever? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed diving into this dark case with us, smash that subscribe button because we've got plenty more twisted stories coming your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we're covering next.